buy the party out.
That's Fox's Jessica Rosenthal in Las Vegas. President Trump taking his own shots at the opposition at a rally in Arizona.
Washington Democrats keep on losing their minds. They hate the fact that we're winning. We're winning big. We're winning.
Just days after former President Obama seemed to be taking credit for the economy, the president countered it is his administration's work to cut red tape that's fueling job growth. Tuesday night's deadly fire at the public library in Porterville, California, was no accident. Two 13-year-old boys have been arrested and jailed
on charges of arson, manslaughter, and conspiracy.
That's Porterville's police chief Eric Crotill. The fire killed one firefighter. Another never came out of the building. They're still searching for him. China reports 394 new infections from the coronavirus. That's the smallest day-to-day increase in several days. But 114 more people have died in China, pushing that total beyond 2,100. Two elderly Japanese tourists who evidently contracted the virus aboard a cruise ship have now died. America is listening to Fox News.
Yikes, are those Christmas bills coming in? Wait, hold on, that was last month. Now it's this month. But by popular demand, we're extending our New Year's solution 4.65% personal loan through February. Money for whatever you want at 4.65% APR from Bank Pacific. We're still celebrating.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal credit opportunity lender as low as 4.65%. Conditions apply.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon is stirring up some of your favorite drinks all night long. Come down on Wednesday and Friday nights from 5:30 to 10 p.m. Indulge in some of your favorite local cuisine and pair it with your favorite drink. From our ice-cold beers, our finest selection of wines and liquors, to our top-notch cocktail specials, your friends at Mezcla Bistro Tumon are ready to serve you. Why limit happy to only an hour? The Mezcla family reminds everyone to drink responsibly. See you on Wednesday and Friday night.
A second day of deliberations in Harvey Weinstein's rape trial in New York City ends without a verdict and with lots of questions from the jury.
Wednesday, the 7 men and 5 women asking the judge again to clarify the wording of Weinstein's charges. He faces 5 in total. The jury requesting to rehear the testimony of accuser Mimi Haley to see Weinstein's emails in which she's mentioned, as well as any emails regarding accuser Annabella Sciorra. Her allegations are now past the statute of limitations, but the prosecution called on her in court to establish the movie mogul's behavior pattern. The jurors also wanting to rehear the testimony of Sciorra's friend and to re-see a doctor's presentation. Deliberations will continue Thursday morning. In New York, Alex Hogan, Fox News.
California's Governor Gavin Newsom limiting his State of the State address Wednesday to a single topic, homelessness, which has overwhelmed the state. Governor Newsom calls it a disgrace and says California can no longer treat it as someone else's problem. They'll leave the light on and a check for you. A settlement's been reached in a discrimination lawsuit against a major hotel chain.
The $10 million class action lawsuit claimed Motel 6 employees in Phoenix shared the whereabouts and private information of its guests with immigration officials who later arrested some of them. The suit claims the hotel chain had a corporate policy or practice of giving ICE information that guests provided at check-in. It also accused the company of providing the information without asking authorities to get a warrant or without having reasonable suspicion that crimes were being committed. Motel 6 has denied any wrongdoing. The company had previously said it told its locations they were not allowed to voluntarily provide guest lists to immigration authorities after 2017 reporting by a Phoenix newspaper. Lisa Lacera, Fox News.
Police in New Orleans report a woman has been struck and killed by a float during a Mardi Gras parade, one of several in the city, leading up to next week's Fat Tuesday celebration. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Hafaday, Guam. We'd like to invite you to join us February 23 for the Guahan Festival of Hope with Franklin Graham at the Guam Football Association soccer field next to Dedido Sports Complex. Franklin Graham will be on Guam to share a life-changing message of God's love and hope for every one of us. This hope-filled event will also feature musical performances by Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter Michael W. Smith. Tommy Coombs Band, and Dennis Agajanian. Don't miss this free once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Come join us for an afternoon of music and a life-changing message of God's love and hope on February 23 at the Guam Football Association soccer field, starting at 4:30 p.m. Gates open at 3:30 p.m. Admission is free. For additional information and updates, visit us and like our Facebook page at Guahan Festival of Hope. See you there. God bless you and God bless Guam.
Hafiday, this is Congressman Michael St. Nicholas. Our veterans deserve the best, and I'm working hard to make sure they receive what they earned defending our freedom. If you need help receiving the benefits you earned from the VA or the Defense Department, please call my office at 475-6453 or go online at stnicholas.house.gov. On behalf of a grateful community, thank you for your service.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael St. Nicholas.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
Yeah, well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of our free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You got that, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
All right. Woo! Shout it from the mountaintops. Start the program every day that way with a recitation of the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Don't be too surprised if other references are made to the United States Constitution throughout the program, as the U.S. Constitution is kind of the foundation of Tall Tales. I would like to think that Tall Tales is a program where the essence of a constitutional republic is heralded, praised, defended, and explained on a daily basis. We do a couple of other things that are pretty interesting too. The first of which is something that I call, I'm not saying we, I guess I can say we since I'm ably assisted by the one, the only, the legendary Real Joe Cruz.
Yes, sir. Our people.
Take a bow, Real Joe Cruz. There we go. He's not the only Joe that we have on the program, but he is the Real Joe the Real Joe Cruz. So this is the part of the program where I start out by kvetching about the Daily News' never-running editorials. Yeah, that's the theme music for this part of the program, which I refer to in my bilingual backwards play on words as Zemi Ikotni, translating to meet the press. And as I started to say, this is the portion of the program where I kvetch about the Daily News, never running editorials about the things that are occurring locally, but always running something from somewhere else, usually from USA Today. Today it's the USA Today Board of Contributors, a guy named Tom Nichols, and the USA Today editorial running in the Daily News is titled, "Sanders was ridiculously naive about the USSR." And I guess the only thing I can say is that Mr. Nichols has a swift and sure grasp of the obvious. And although I don't like the idea of the Daily News not running local editorials, instead of going to USA Today and Gannett boilerplate and putting it on our local editorial page, on the other hand, anybody who wants to criticize Bernie Sanders kind of gets a pass, because I can't think of a worse disaster than Bernie Sanders being president of our heroic country. As this editorial is headlined, Sanders was ridiculously naive about the USSR. He was a commie worshiper for most of his life. Now he holds himself out as a democratic socialist. I would tell you what it is that I don't like about socialists and socialism. Unfortunately, it's only a 2-hour program, so I could barely scratch the surface in that abbreviated period of time. On the other side, we've got the Pacific Daily News, and we've got the Guam Daily Post, who runs a pretty good country editorial day in and day out. They find an issue that's important. They state the issue. They state the facts related to the issue. They have their own theories as to what's involved in the issue. And ordinarily, there's a call to action. The editorials in the Post don't pull their punches. It's not one of those, well, I didn't want to say anything because, we have 40,000 readers, and one of them might have been offended if I criticize Senator Smucker Huckowitz, so we just let it go. They don't do that. Good for the Post. So today they're talking about the military's toxic waste. And although I understand the point that they're making, I think that if they had a dog, they need to move him to a different tree. Here's how it goes. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia ruled on February 14th that the government of Guam was very tardy in filing a lawsuit that seeks payment for the military's dumping of toxic waste on Guam at the now capped ORDOT dump. Very tardy. In other words, the government of Guam missed the statute of limitations by a mile. Now, the way that the English language is used, the choice of words, oftentimes can produce a connotation, a denotation, that's somewhat different from the connotation, or vice versa. So by saying that the government of Guam was very tardy, when you hear the word tardy, what do you think of, Real Joe Cruz?
Me going to school, sir.
Yeah, and if you were late for school, the teacher might atatilik you and say you were tardy again.
Yes.
Real Joe Cruz, right?
Yes, sir. It's better be an hour early than a minute late.
Yeah. So when we see the word, the word tardy, of course, means not being timely. And missing a statute of limitations, of course, is a classic case of not being timely. But if you say, well, the government was tardy, that really softens it up, doesn't it? Well, yeah, the real Joe Cruz was tardy, but he came to school. And when he got to school, he didn't shoot any spit. Well, maybe I better not say that. Maybe I'm introducing a fact that's not. He didn't shoot too many spitballs.
It's
right?
not in evidence, sir.
Yeah. But it downplays the whole thing. Tardy's not anywhere near as bad as being very, very late. So here's what the Post says. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia ruled on February 14th that the government of Guam was very tardy in filing a lawsuit that seeks payment for the military's dumping of toxic waste on Guam at the now capped ORDOT dump. So if it's just tardiness, can't we let that go? Ordinarily, probably all you got for being tardy was kind of a light scolding, right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yeah, we can let it slide.
Yeah. You didn't walk home with an F on your report card, or you didn't have to stay after school, or
No.
So tardy's not so bad. And that the government of Guam was just tardy. They were very tardy, but it was only tardiness. And the editorial goes on to say, Gov Guam was 10 years late in filing the lawsuit in federal court. The ruling essentially says. So you remember that day you were tardy when in first grade, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you came back when you were a sophomore in high school, right?
Yeah.
That's when you finally got to school?
It hit me. I should be at school.
Yeah, wow. I think I'm missing something here. So, contrast 10 years late with the use of the word very tardy in the first paragraph. The deadline to sue for environmental damage under federal law was 2007. Gov Guam sued a decade too late in 2017. In the lawsuit, Gov Guam had argued that the Navy was responsible for much of the ORDOT dump's contamination. The local government sought to recoup its costs of closing the dump and building a landfill, a tab that reached close to $200 million, and which entailed Gov Guam borrowing money from the bond market to foot the bill. Guam residents are helping to pay for this annual debt payment. Not just helping, we're paying it. And Gov Guam borrowed more than $30 million for additional space at the Lajón landfill more recently. Guam sued for at least $160 million in hopes the government of Guam, specifically the military, would pay up. The Office of Attorney General intends to mount an effort to try and change the appellate court's ruling. Now, I can see what the appellate brief is going to look like. Well, actually, it's too late because the case, they've already submitted their appellate brief and the appellate court ruled against them. So there are only a couple of things available now. The government of Guam could petition the Court of Appeals for the circuit, the District of Columbia Circuit, to reconsider the matter en banc. That means with all of the justices in that court hearing the case, or the government of Guam could petition the Supreme Court for a writ of certiorari. I've already ruled on the chances of the Supreme Court granting cert on this. Not going to happen. This is not the kind of case that the Supreme Court sharpens its knives on. The Supreme Court is not an error-correcting court. The Supreme Court has a higher purpose, resolving conflicts amongst the circuit courts and engaging in what amounts to policy. A missed statute of limitations and nothing more is not the kind of thing that gets the Supreme Court very excited. Petition for rehearing en banc? I'm not going to rule on that. I'll just have to kind of watch and see. But if the government of Guam does and follows along with the Post's lead here, I suppose the brief could say something like this. Yes, the government of Guam was tardy, but we weren't chewing gum. We had done all of our homework. We wore good, clean clothes to school. We didn't tease any of the girls in our class, although that's our usual custom, right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, this tardiness thing, I don't know. That's going to be hard for the Attorney General to live down.
So who was tardy?
Who?
Yeah, who? I'm trying to is there a face to who was tardy or?
That's the World Health Organization, Real Joe Cruz.
Whom?
Now, who is the World Health Organization? That's the United Nations.
Okay,
who's not in this case?
I'm out of line.
Yeah, who isn't in this case?
I see.
Did you have a question?
No, sir.
I thought maybe you did, but you're mixing up apples and tardiness here, Real Joe Cruz. Who is not in this case? I think what you're thinking about is coronavirus, because that's where who comes in, right?
True, sir.
Yeah, okay. Where was I here? In the lawsuit, GovGuam argued that the Navy is responsible. Guam sued for at least $160 million in hopes the U.S. government, specifically the military, would pay up. The Office of the Attorney General intends to mount an effort to try and change the appellate court's ruling. While the avenue is still worth trying, Guam's governor and senators also need to send a strong collective message to the White House. Send a message, or maybe make a polite request. Here's our strong message. You know, you guys came in and you really messed up our landfill and you turned it into an environmental hazard. And now you got to pay. Because we sued and we were tardy. So you got to pay now. Compared to, fellas, we had some problems here. We lost this case where we were trying to recover some of the money for the damages that y'all caused. But we got tossed out of court on a technicality. So now we're coming back and asking you if you could do the right thing and reimburse some of the money that we had to pony up because you screwed up our landfill. Which one do you think would be the more effective real Joe Cruz?
I'm not sure, sir.
You're not sure?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'm tardy. Tardy again.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk with another Joe here for a minute. You can flip a coin while we're talking.
Okay.
Good afternoon, another Joe.
What were the options again?
One option was to send a strong message to the Congress and the president. You guys better pay up for this dump. And the other option was a polite request. You guys messed up our dump. We sued, but we lost on a technicality. So can you help us out?
Yeah, probably the second option seems like the winner. We could also try to go for Jotun down and say, hey, by the way, for the past, 20-something years, we've been sending our young men and women to go to die for our fellow Americans to help kill terrorists. Just saying,
I know that's a really popular argument. It's not an argument that resounds with me, to tell you the truth, another Joe. People from the Federated States of Micronesia enlist in large numbers in all four of the services from the FSM. Do you think they do that out of a sense of patriotism?
I would say it's closer to.
It can't.
I'm sorry?
It can't be patriotism because they're not citizens of the United States. They don't live in the United States.
Well, initially, possibly not, but after they've been indoctrinated, then it's a pretty strong argument that's why they stay in, right?
But not why they enlist. Here's another example, another Joe.
Sure.
Until Subic Bay closed, the United States was enlisting 2,500 people, Philippine citizens, into the U.S. Navy every year. And the competition amongst those who wanted to enlist was extremely high. That the people that enlisted were very, very qualified because there were so many people who wanted to enlist in the United States Navy.
Yeah.
So was that because they were patriotic and loved the United States so much? Or in both those cases, was it because they saw an economic opportunity available by enlisting in the armed forces that wouldn't be available to them at home?
Yeah. So if they're not convinced with the patriotic motivation, then we could turn to, hey, we're babysitting your diplomatic. We're doing diplomatic work for Uncle Sam here with his compact impact. We're left holding the bag of a lot of the, and we're even going into debt.
I like that, another Joe. Because a way of phrasing that is to say that we are an important element of your foreign policy, and your foreign policy initiative is costing us a lot of money, just like you're dumping waste in our dump.
For several decades, as a matter of fact.
So, Uncle Sam, you might think about it. Now, we aren't going to be able to get judicial relief on this, but you might think in terms of having a good relationship with the Americans that live out here in the far-flung edge of your empire by doing the right thing as far as the dump is concerned and as far as our participating in your foreign policy initiative is concerned.
Okay, Bob, you also hit on another thing. The theme is do the right thing. It's a theme that contemporary culture in the U.S.
It sounds like a Spike Lee movie.
Exactly, Spike Lee.
I like it anyhow.
Popular. So the concept is we show examples of how we do the right thing, even when our lives are in jeopardy. We can point to an example of the Tweed during the Japanese occupation, how we played hide and go seek with hiding Tweed from the Japanese for was it 3 years?
2.5 years. But you have to be, you know how I am about pronouns. It wasn't we, it was they.
They, okay.
Yeah, and the old use of the word they.
Real quick, I want to ask you, your theme music, is that not the same as the theme music for the Blues Brothers?
No.
Is it Eddie Rabbit? No?
No. You mean at the beginning of the program?
Yes, sir.
That's theme music from a 1950s TV series called Peter Gunn.
Peter Rabbit.
Peter
Gunn, rather.
Gunn.
Yeah.
Do you get the? Hey, slow down, another Joe. Do you get the significance? The theme music from Peter Gunn, and then the Second Amendment right after that. Gunn, Second Amendment.
I'm kind of slow sometimes. I apologize.
Yeah, the Second Amendment deals with guns. So to lay the proper foundation for my reverent reading of the Second Amendment, we play the theme from Peter Gunn.
Peter Gunn. But isn't it also the theme music for the John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd movie Blues Brothers?
I give up. Your questions are too hard for me, another Joe.
It is. There's a quote. I wanted to quote John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd. When we're on a mission from God. so part of the mission for God in your program is the Second Amendment protection, and of course for me and others also would be freedom of religion, where we're trying to protect our faith, our church, and from those who would do wrong both in the church and out, not part of the church. And in the context of the Blues Brothers, they're trying to save, I think, was it an orphanage for children?
Well, I don't want to be connected with any brothers who use blue as part of their names. Now, if you had brothers that were the Red Brothers, being a good Republican, then I might sidle up to that. But Blues Brothers, I don't think so. Another Joe.
Thanks a lot for your time, Uncle Bob.
It's good talking to you, another Joe. Okay, so where was I here? I'm trying to finish up this editorial in the Post. Yeah, Guam's governor and senators also need to send a strong collective message to the White House, the Pentagon, and Congress. Pounding on the table, right? If you want a strong message, why are you saying senators? The senators would send some, Senator Kelly Marsh, would send a group of young kids in grass skirts over there to carry the message for us. Well, it's kind of like FestPac. The first break already? All right.
Time flies when you're having great tall tales.
That's very true.
If you own a Toyota, please listen to this. It could help you avoid injury, maybe save your life. The Takata airbags installed in certain Toyotas can explode and shoot out sharp metal fragments at people inside the vehicle. You don't need to be in a collision. They could explode any time. In the U.S., these airbags have caused 26 deaths. There's been a worldwide recall of Takata airbags, and most have had the faulty parts replaced. But here in Guam, there are still over 3,000 Toyotas on the road with potentially lethal airbags, and yours could be one of them. So please, take your Toyota to Atkins Grow, even if you didn't buy it from us, and get the inflator replaced. It costs you nothing. It takes just about an hour, and it could save a life, yours or someone you love. The AK song says we're here for life. That's never been more true.
At Atkins Grow, we're here for life.
GRMC's Neuroscience and Neurology Department treats a wide spectrum of disorders associated with the nervous system, spine, and brain. Some of the more common disorders include seizures, epilepsy, dementia, sleep disorders, migraine, and stroke, which is one of the leading causes of death on Guam. GRMC's neuroscience team is equipped with the latest technology and the finest neurological doctors. To make an appointment, contact GRMC Specialty Clinics at 645-5500.
And now, back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Okay, so here we are. I'm still in Jimmy Ekotny trying to finish up the post editorial. I got a validation from a poster on Facebook, Andy Millsap, who says that the theme from Peter Gunn is played during the Blues Brothers movie, although it's not the theme of the Blues Brothers movie. Okay, thank you, Andy. Okay, so going back here, the Pentagon and the governor and the legislature should send a strong message to the president, the Pentagon, and the White House, Pentagon, and Congress that the massive bill to shut down, cap off, and keep the Orda dump and the construction landfill in Iran should be a shared financial responsibility by the military and the U.S. government in general. Well, if it's going to be part of the U.S. government's responsibility, I don't think it would be something that the military would be involved in. I think it would come out of a different pocket than the military budget. But I understand the point that the editorial is trying to make. And while the military of today has argued the environmentally sinful military is a thing from the past, it should be held accountable for its past mistakes. The issue of Guam missing the deadline is separate from the federal government's responsibility to help pay for the cleanup and mitigation costs. How could it be separate? Because people, are very free with talking about, well, you have a right to this and a right to that, and it's the law, etc. Well, when you come right down to it, when we're talking about rights and the law is what a judge in a court case would come out and say, yes, it's the law, and therefore you, Mr. Plaintiff, can recover. If that's not the case, then you can't. You're really in an awkward position to argue your legal rights. And we've had our shot at vindicating our legal rights, and obviously it didn't work. So that's to say that it's a separate issue. The issue of GovGuam missing the deadline is separate from the federal government's responsibility to help pay for the cleanup. Well, what is the source of that responsibility if it's not the law? A federal court acknowledged that the United States deposited dangerous munitions and chemicals at the Orda dump for decades and left Guam to foot the bill. This shows the U.S. government's responsibility has not been in doubt. This means the federal government cannot hide behind a missing deadline. Well, they don't have to hide behind it. I know I'm being a little bit picky here, But if you're going to make an argument to the national government, you kind of have to have a credible argument to advance. A lot of hard feelings and emotion are not going to get you there. Sentence says, this means the federal government cannot hide behind a missed deadline. I don't think anybody's trying to hide anything. You know, when a case is filed in court, it becomes a lawyer's game. And lawyers have a responsibility to represent their clients and advance every ethical argument that they can on behalf of their clients. So that's what happened here, and the court said the national government does not have a responsibility to reimburse the government of Guam because the government of Guam is 10 years late. That's not hiding. So, you know, the overuse of hyperbole rather than strengthening a case tends to weaken a case. You know, when a careful reader like me reads this, is federal government hiding behind a missing deadline? No. Then the editorial shifts gears and says, for the sake of being a good neighbor, the military must convince its parent, the federal government, to make Guam whole. And again, I just don't think that that's the way things work. I don't think that the commander of Joint Forces Marianas is going to attempt to persuade anybody in the national government, hey, come on, you guys, pay up here. That's just not their job. There are other channels that have to be pursued. Perhaps the Department of Interior would be a good place to start. The cost of shutting down the Orta dump, the millions of dollars needed to maintain the site, including the operation of a flare system so that the methane from decaying rubbish will not harm the health of Guam residents, and the ongoing cost of keeping space available at the Lodge Zone landfill is a shared responsibility between the local and federal governments. That sentence should read, should be a shared responsibility, because it isn't right now. So, you know, the old saying, wishing doesn't make it so. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, on one hand, has been proactive in acting as the environmental watchdog on Guam. On the other hand, another agency should be conscientiously helping to nudge the federal government to make sure it doesn't leave Guam hanging with a massive environmental tab. I agree with that. That is the way, as far as I'm concerned, to couch the issue. Not the hyperbole approach and the overstatement of a case. Okay, I guess another Joe wants to ride on the Ferris wheel again. Okay, another Joe, go for it.
All right, Bob, here's the pitch. All right, so in theory, usually it's someone of the Democrat persuasion that they will usually go to lawyers as they're one of their first recourses.
Yeah.
They seem to be lawyer happy. Whereas someone of the Republican persuasion, they usually don't lawyer up as quickly. I think that was one of the distinctions they made between the Democrat and Republican Party. The Democrats usually lawyer up quicker. So if the argument is made that we need to be lawyered up and going to courts, filing lawsuits in courts quicker and on time, in a timely manner, that would make an argument that we need to be putting forward more lawsuits against Uncle Sam and more often, just in case. Would that sound possibly in the neighborhood?
Well, I would say this, starting off talking about Democrats and Republicans. As a Republican, I would advance the proposition that a legislative settlement to a problem or fix or remedy of a problem is ordinarily superior to a judicial fix because the court is not democratic. We've got 9 politicians that wear black robes to work. They're not elected. They're not responsive to the public. They got lifetime jobs. So when the Supreme Court rules on something, the chances of having broad public acceptability are limited. I give you abortion as an example. If the Supreme Court had stayed out of it, we wouldn't be arguing about abortion anymore. As far as timeliness of filing lawsuits, there are some times when, regardless of a person's philosophical approach to problems, you got to file a lawsuit and you got to do it on time.
So the trick is to distinguish when it's superior to have a legislative fix versus filing a lawsuit in a timely manner. It's not necessarily apples and oranges, but
No.
possibly it might be sometimes.
And it is not an easy decision to make, and that's why electing good people to office is so important, because we would expect relatively smart, educated, experienced, right-thinking people to know how to handle those questions better than party hacks.
So knowing when to have a superior legislative fix versus when to file your lawsuit in a timely manner, that will usually call for the wisdom and experience from statesmen, sages like yourself, right, Uncle Bob?
Yeah, I guess you're right. I can't argue with that, another Joe.
Thanks for your time, Uncle Bob.
Okay, another Joe. Another Joe closed with a really strong point there, Real Joe Cruz. Okay, I've got Domingo on the line. Good afternoon, Domingo.
Half day, Judge Bob, and thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, on a criminally, I take it that murder is considered that there's no statute of limitation for murder.
That's right.
What about for wrongful death? Is there a statute of limitation for wrongful death?
Yes.
Okay, because how I see it is, if we have already established that the dumping of all of these chemicals and all these dumping of hazardous waste has already been established, then we can already tie that all of those hazardous materials is killing the environment, leading to the death of people of Guam. Could we not establish that and make it a wrongful death or pretty much a murder case, murdering the people of Guam?
No, no.
By knowingly leaving such conditions?
No, we can't do that, Domingo. That's a bridge too far. I'll give you high marks for creativity, but you'd never be able to make that fly. You'd have to. The word is nexus. You'd have to draw a nexus, establish a nexus between someone who died because of something that the national government dumped in that dump. That would be. I would say it wouldn't be impossible. It would be beyond impossible to come up with proofs on that.
Okay, now what about the current EPA regulations where we have the Clean Water Act and it was the result of the U.S. government that created this mess in the first place? Because if I understand it, some of the rules and regulations basically have from cradle to grave type of situations. And since the cradle was created by the U.S. government, would they not be responsible for the insurement of a Clean Water Act?
Well, that's why it was possible to file suit against the national government. That's how it worked. So the Environmental Protection Agency came in and said, you guys you're leaking all kinds of bad stuff into the Lawnfit River, and we're getting a lot of complaints from the Boy Scouts on that.
Right.
So you got to clean up. You got to clean up that dump, right? But there are laws on the books that allow local governments to file suit against the national government for these kinds of things. But like any other kind of lawsuit, you got to do it right. If you don't do it right, then you're not going to prevail.
Exactly. So how I see it is, since the cradle was created by the federal government, maybe that's the avenue that I'm not a law profession by any means, but I am familiar with some of the federal regulations regarding the Clean Water Act, which the cradle to grave is the responsible party who created that cradle in the first place.
Well, I don't know about the cradle to grave analogy. That sounds too Democrat for me. The Democrats want to take care of you from cradle to grave. But let's put it this way. All of this environmental legislation came along about 1970. The EPA was founded, clean water, clean air, and all of those things. But part of the mechanism for this entire set of regulations was to allow people to bring suit in federal court to enforce their rights under those acts. And that's exactly what the government of Guam tried to do, but the government of Guam screwed it up by 10 years.
Wow. So, well, it is disheartening to know that we are being left. I'm just a loss for words at the moment because it is one of those we are left with the bill. I don't know. I don't want to say that we've been ignorant or we've been we haven't been prudent in pursuing the case, but still, it was created by the federal government.
Well, what was created by the federal government?
The situation with the hazardous waste being in the landfills in the first place.
So, okay, but, we just keep going around the same, we're engaged in a tautology here. So in 1970, the United States government decided to put all of these environmental regulations in place, and part of the regulatory scheme was the creation of a claim against the national government by people who were wronged by the national government. But like anything else, you can't sit around and hope that things work out. You have to take action. And the government of Guam didn't take action on time. 10 years too late. Although the Post would say, well, a little bit tardy.
Yeah.
So.
All right, Judge Rob. Thanks for the insight, and hopefully that there are ways, and the Department of Interior do take heed or somehow help out.
I know that probably everybody in the government, the governor monitors tall tales every day, 3 or 4 people at the legislature do. So I gave the coaching as to how to go about approaching this in the way that might achieve a proper result. So I'm going to be watching it, and if they don't do it, I will probably get after them again, Domingo.
Definitely, Judge. I appreciate your time, and you have a great week.
Thank you very much, Domingo. Nice talking to you. Okay, so where was I here? I guess I finally finished the Post editorial, and you surfaced a very good issue, Post. I didn't like your choice of words, and that's what editorials are made of. Are made of words. And when you engage in hyperbole and something that if it were aimed at me, I would call a cheap shot. I'm just sitting here hiding behind this microphone, right? And then I think the editorial contributes to a misunderstanding that it's one more of these, well, the federal government's screwing us again. And I don't know how many times I've explained that if you went to Washington, D.C., you could hire a taxi and say, I'm going to give you $100. I want you to take me to the we're going to screw Guam department. And I'll come back and explain that right after this short break here.
Wow, nice smile. So perfect and all.
Thanks. I owe it all to Dr. Robert Yang and his smile team. They do wonders for a healthy, happy mouth.
Got teeth? Don't wait until they hurt. Schedule your routine checkup and cleaning with Dr. Yang and his smile team. Suite 119 in the East West Business Center, Upper Tumon. Call 647-8702 or 3.
The best thing that happened to teeth since toothpaste.
Dr. Yang and his smile team.
They make smiles happen.
Cocoa Coffee Company is now available at Circle K. Single origin coffee beans carefully sourced and locally roasted to give you the freshest cup of coffee Guam has to offer. Grab a cup that's brewed every 30 minutes or purchase a bag of the locally roasted whole beans. Flavors now serving: light medium roasted Ethiopia and medium dark roasted Jamaican Blue Mountain. Exclusively available at Circle K. With every Cocoa Coffee Company purchase, a portion of the proceeds will go towards the Cocoa Recovery Program.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So if you visit Washington, D.C., you'll see a lot of really beautiful architecture, really nice buildings. There's the Capitol with its dome, and the White House and the Justice Department and the State Department, et cetera. And you see a lot of this classical architecture, this classical Roman and Greek architecture, the big pillars out in front of the building, and a lot of white marble, bronze plaques on the front of the building identifying the building, Federal Bureau of Investigation, U.S. Department of Justice, et cetera. Well, I hate to burst the balloon of a lot of the folks out there, the U.S. is screwing us gang, but there is no building in Washington, D.C. with the Greek columns and the bronze plaque with the name, with a plaque on the front of the building that says "Screw Guam Department." There is no building with a full complement of bureaucrats, word processors, PowerPoint projectors, etc., whose job it is to come up with ways that the national government can go about screwing Guam. It just doesn't happen. Now, sometimes the things that the national government does are things that don't sit well with us. Our biggest problem as far as the national government is concerned, we actually have two. We're so far away, and there aren't very many of us. It's not who we are. It's how many of us there are. There are only 165,000 of us out here. And we're 3,800 miles from Hawaii, for crying out loud. So the fact that every single member of the 435-member House of Representatives does not wake up every morning and say, "Oh, what can I do to help the folks of Guam?" is not because they're bad people or evil people, well, except maybe the Democrat. But anyhow, that's another story. It's a function of where we are and how many of us there are. And, of course, we don't have, not being one of the 50 states, we don't have full representation in Congress. But to start out with this approach that it's the government, the U.S., that's always screwing us is not only wrong, but it's counterproductive because it keeps us from searching for the remedy to the problems that we would assign to ourselves. Like when I went through this whole thing with the dump, to come out with the raised Che Guevara fist and say, "Power to the people of Guam. What you did out there is killed people." Like Domingo's theory that there's no statute of limitations on murder. So by dumping bad stuff in the dump, obviously the national government, there's a murder dimension there or a wrongful death dimension. Interesting theory, but it's not going to win the hearts and minds of the folks that we need to convince, which is the folks in Congress. Okay, so closing up, Jimmy Ikotny for today, no blue star.
Wow.
News.
Sir,
Yeah.
do we have a Department of Screw ourselves on Guam?
I don't think we need one. You know, in the interest of streamlining the government, you know, we do such a good job without having a department dedicated to that particular mission. I think we could probably save a little bit of money on it. It seems like that's an additional task for so many parts of our government. Yeah, but good point, Real Joe Cruz. And let's see, somebody else here agrees with you. I got a poster who says Guam politicals, past and present, screwed itself, blaming everybody else. Yeah. You know, that's a human tendency because, like, you know, when there was no Tall Tales on Tuesday, I know that my international radio listening audience probably was both sad and angry. They're probably saying, I'd like to get my hands on the character that saw to it that there was no Tall Tales on Tuesday. So I exercised some responsibility, if you recall, on Wednesday. Remember what I did, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
I blamed it on you.
Absolutely, sir. And that's just fine. Someone's got to take the rap.
There you go. That's the job for the Real Joe Cruz. All right. So from there we go to the card. And let's see. First feature on the card is Tall Tales versus The Burn. And I've got from Washington, the WAPO of all places. You'd think the Washington Post would say that The Burn would be the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln. But the WAPO says, here's 14 questions for Bernie Sanders proposed by a gentleman named Bernie Lane. So I went through the first two questions, and now I'm on number 3. This now becomes, I think, more topical because I saw in the paper that Ricky Orsini is organizing a Bernie Sanders committee right here on Guam, trying to scrape together enough votes so that in the Democrat convention, Guam will be sending delegates to the Democrat National Convention, Bernie Sanders delegates. So all you Sandernistas out there, you want to pay close attention to this. Here's question number 3. Speaking of higher education, after New York instituted free tuition for many students at its state schools in 2017, enrollment at private colleges that primarily serve students living in New York dropped 5%. How can liberal arts colleges and many small-town local economies that depend on them cope with your plan to make public college tuition free everywhere for everyone? And here's Bernie's answer. I don't care about them small colleges. I want everybody to have a free college education, not just the fat cats. Well, that's my Bernie Sanders imitation.
It's a good one, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to that big halftime, 1700s. Let's go to that big halftime show.
Is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Taking on one another. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. 6 of the Democrat presidential candidates debating in Las Vegas, most taking on the newcomer to the stage, Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, including Senator Elizabeth Warren.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
Pete Buttigieg called Bloomberg a billionaire who wants to buy the party out. Bernie Sanders charged that billionaires have an effective tax rate lower than the middle class. Bloomberg defending himself.
I can't speak for all billionaires. All I know is I've been very lucky, made a lot of money, and I'm giving it all away to make this country better. And a good chunk of it goes to the Democratic Party as well.
The debate hosted by NBC News. Nevada holds its caucuses on Saturday. President Trump counter-programming again with a campaign rally at the same time in Arizona.
We're bringing back jobs. We're bringing back factories. Everybody's working. Nobody's ever had a better year than we've been having. And we've been doing it for a long time, right almost from the beginning.
The president predicted the DNC will find a way to deny Bernie Sanders his party's nomination. If their count is accurate, the number of new coronavirus infections in China continues to slow. Fewer than 400 new cases reported Wednesday, but another 114 people have died in China. And in Japan, 2 elderly tourists who'd been aboard the Diamond Princess cruise ship have now died from the virus as well. On the Fox Business Network, Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institutes of Health defending the decision to bring Americans infected on that ship back to the U.S.
If we get a worldwide pandemic where you have sustained transmission in multiple regions throughout the world, then it's going to be very difficult to adequately contain it anywhere.
The evacuation effectively doubling the number of known infected patients in the U.S. America is listening to Fox News.
Yikes, are those Christmas bills coming in? Wait, hold on, that was last month. Now it's this month. But by popular demand, we're extending our New Year's solution 4.65% personal loan through February. Money for whatever you want at 4.65% APR from Bank Pacific. We're still celebrating.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal credit opportunity lender as low as 4.65%. Conditions apply.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon is stirring up some of your favorite drinks all night long. Come down on Wednesday and Friday nights from 5:30 to 10 p.m. Indulge in some of your favorite local cuisine and pair it with your favorite drink. From our ice-cold beers, our finest selection of wines and liquors, to our top-notch cocktail specials, your friends at Mezcla Bistro Tumon are ready to serve you. Why limit happy to only an hour? The Mezcla family reminds everyone to drink responsibly. See you on Wednesday and Friday night.
Sentencing scheduled Thursday for former Trump political advisor Roger Stone.
Stone was convicted on 7 counts of obstruction, witness tampering, and making false statements to Congress. The federal judge presiding over the case, Amy Berman Jackson, said Tuesday that she'll move ahead with the sentencing as scheduled, rejecting requests from the defense for a delay over concerns of jury misconduct. Jackson is expected to delay implementation of the sentence until after she decides whether to grant the motion for a new trial. All 4 federal prosecutors withdrew from the case following a reversal by the Department of Justice on Stone's sentencing recommendation. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
Former intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning again asking a judge to let her out of jail. In a motion filed Wednesday in federal court in Virginia, Manning's lawyers argue that she's shown during 11 months of incarceration she cannot be forced into testifying before a grand jury. She's been in jail since May for refusing to testify before a grand jury investigating WikiLeaks. State of Tennessee planning to execute a killer tonight. Nicholas Sutton scheduled to die in the electric chair. He'd killed 3 people, including his grandmother, when he was 18, but he wasn't sentenced to die until he and another inmate fatally stabbed a convicted child molester. NASCAR driver Ryan Newman walked out of a Florida hospital on Wednesday holding the hands of his children, seemingly miraculous, just days after he was involved in a horrific crash at the Daytona 500.
He went from serious critical to walking out of the hospital because of the care he got, and also a strong young man. So, you know, and he got support from family and from friends and from us, and I think the entire nation was praying for him.
That's Dr. Danny Yazarevich of the Halifax Medical Center, where Newman was treated. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
GRMC's Neuroscience and Neurology Department treats a wide spectrum of disorders associated with the nervous system, spine, and brain. Some of the more common disorders include seizures, epilepsy, dementia, sleep disorders, migraine, and stroke, which is one of the leading causes of death on Guam. GRMC's neuroscience team is equipped with the latest technology and the finest neurological doctors. To make an appointment, contact GRMC Specialty Clinics at 645-5500.
Hafa Adai, this is Congressman Michael St. Nicholas. Our veterans deserve the best, and I'm working hard to make sure they receive what they earned defending our freedom. If you need help receiving the benefits you earned from the VA or the Defense Department, please call my office at 475-6453 or go online at stnicholas.house.gov. On behalf of a grateful community, thank you for your service.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael St. Nicholas.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Another great halftime show here on Tall Tales that we all come to love so much, cherish, etc. We do it every day at 1700. So that's a halftime show. That means this is the second half of Tall Tales. And I'm now going to work through the card. I spent a lot of time on Zemi Ikutni today. And now I go to the second item on the card, which is Jim Moylan versus Raging Lee. Now, I'm going to spell, I don't have to spell Moylan. That's a name that's been around here ever since. You know, it's probably as common and a popular name as one could find on Guam, except for maybe Santos and Cruz. Lee, not so common, right? I used to know a couple of guys named, I still know one of them, Lee Weber and Lee Holmes, the late Lee Holmes, may he rest in peace. And when we would go to breakfast together, Holmes and Weber would sit on the same side of the table, which I referred to as the Lee side of the table.
Nice.
Of course. Yeah. But Senator Lee's first name, she spells it with a diacritical mark over the E, a primary accent mark over the E, causing me to make a certain pause, because we have another senator whose name incorporates punctuation marks. And by that I'm referring to Senator Kelly Marsh Titano. And I've explained before, but if you're new to the program, Senator Kelly Marsh writes out her name, or when her name appears in print, even in official publications, it's Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, a name that I can pretty easily get along with. It took me a little while to figure out that Kelly can be either, well, can I say this? Either a man's name or I don't know. Boy, I'm really skating on thin ice there when I talk about men and women and names, right? But let's put it this way. They could be named Kelly. They could, yeah. And Marsh, yeah, titungo na hafta mano masangan Marsh gifinu tomorrow. I'll find out tomorrow. Bring that in here. And then after the word marsh, there is a parenthesis, and then the word Titano, and then a closed parenthesis. So if I have to refer to the senator, it's pretty burdensome to say Kelly Marsh, parenthesis, Titano, close parenthesis. Parenthesis, close parenthesis takes too long. So by the powers vested in me as the host of Tall Tales, I have assigned a sound value to the parenthesis sign. And this is how a parenthesis sounds when a person is reading out loud. Therefore, the senator's name for Tall Tales purposes is Kelly Marsh Titano. So it took me a while to get used to that. And of course, I had to invent that sound. But then we have Regine Lee with that primary accent over the E, R-E-G-I-N-E. So with a primary accent over the E, that means that there are two syllables in the name, Ray and Jean, but the stress, the emphasis has to be on the first syllable. So her name is not Regine Lee, it's Regine Lee. And if one were not careful, a careful listener, it almost sounds like Raging Lee, doesn't it, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
As in Raging Bull?
As in Raging Bull, yeah, yeah. But this is not Raging Bull, this is Raging Lee. Yeah. So this Regine is kind of hard to say. So if I slip and refer to the senator as Raging Lee, I hope everyone will understand. Because I want to make sure I pronounce people's names correctly. I mean, if I could do it for Kelly Marsh Titano, why can't I do it for Raging Lee? So, Moylan versus Raging Lee. This is a story that ran in both the Daily News and the Post. The Daily News calls it Justify Your Travel. With 670,000 legislative travel costs, Senator seeks accountability. $670,000. Senators and legislative staff spent nearly it's 67,000. It's 67,000. All right, my bad. Senators and legislative staff spent $67,000 in airline fares and daily allowances in off-island travel from February to October 2019, based on data for the 35th legislature. Of 6 senators who traveled off-island during the time, Senator Raging Bisco Lee topped the list with nearly $16,800 in total expenses, followed by Senator Tello Titagui and Amanda Shelton with $9,000 plus each in travel expenses. The 3 senators made several trips to Washington, D.C. and other states for meetings and summits. Yeah, I can imagine Tello at a summit. Lee's office said, now, once again, mental image, Lee's office. You find this office in the legislature, and it's anthropomorphic. So a reporter walks up to the front of the office and says, I have a question. Why did Senator Raging Lee spend so much money? And the door of the office, you could read it. Senator Lee goes to Washington. Yeah, because it wasn't a person in the office. It was the office itself. So Lee's office said, being chairwoman of the Committee on Federal and Foreign Affairs, it becomes imperative, not helpful, not even necessary, imperative for the senator to meet with key federal officials with oversight of Guam issues. Now, if Senator Lee were in the executive branch, I wouldn't like it, but I could at least understand it. Because you read the Organic Act carefully, you won't find anything in the Organic Act that says that senators and our legislature have a duty to meet with key federal officials. There's nothing in the Organic Act that requires it or even allows it. Nothing that prohibits it. But, of course, it's a lot of fun. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., it's a lot of fun to go back there. And if you're in a situation where you can sit down and chat with the high muckety mucks, yeah, that's pretty important. Her office, meaning Regine Lee's office, said while Lee may have taken the most trips to advance Guam's interests, now that would be the only reason that she would take a trip, she's been able to balance those expenses by being one of the most frugal Democrats when it comes to hiring staffers. Now, there's a word you don't see connected with the legislature very often, frugal. Yeah. 6 legislative staffers also made off-island trips, including 2 who attended a seminar for fiscal analysts in Ohio. Senator Jim Moylan, however, thinks there's not enough justification for taxpayer-funded travel. Well, good for you, Senator. So he's seeking a change in the 35th legislature's standing rules to require justification in how each trip benefits Guam. A quote, "I am not opposed to official travel as I believe it is much needed at times, especially if we're seeking monetary benefits for our island." Well, you can't get everything right. You're wrong about that, Jim, but you got a good idea, so we'll go on with it. My belief is that if we are using taxpayer dollars on these travels, then we need to provide the community some justification in how and why we were spending those thousands of dollars. Seems right to me. Moylan introduced on Wednesday a resolution seeking an amendment to the 35th legislature's standing rules to require submission of, 1, the reason why the individual was required to travel at government expense. 2, the benefit that this travel shall provide for Guam. 3, justification if the trip could have been avoided by the use of other technological means, like the telephone, for instance. And you know, I've commented on this before. When the Organic Act was drawn up in 1950, it made sense to have a lieutenant governor. You know, when it took a long time to get from the mainland to Guam, when telephonic communications was expensive and hard to use, etc. But in the 21st century, with all of the communications devices that we have, you know, you could, instead of taking a trip to Washington, you could do a FaceTime with all of these important officials. Call them on the phone. Send them a text. Get into a WhatsApp chat with them. How about a little Instagram? But no, we got to get on the plane and we got to go back there, right? So that's what Jim is saying. Number 3, if the justification, if the trip could have been avoided by the use of other technological means. 4, a detailed report of all the expenses incurred during the trip. Yeah. 5, a detailed report outlining all official activities the traveler engaged in during the trip. Now, I'd like to see a 6, the benefit accruing to the people because you took the trip. Moylan said the present policy duplicates GovGuam's general policy, where only travel documents are required for submission and receipts for or other expenses are only needed for reimbursement of expenses, or if one expended above their issued per diem. However, what is not required is further justification in how the trip benefits the island. or if alternative technological means were considered. Well, good on you, Jim. And of course, Senator Raging Lee won't like it because she apparently likes to travel, and we know it's imperative. So that's all we really need to know. It's imperative for her to go back there and interface with these officials in the national government who have oversight over Guam. I don't know of anybody in the national government that has oversight over Guam, but once again, I'm being very picky here, right? So what ought to happen is this. That resolution ought to pass. The legislature ought to comply with it. And then it ought to do the same thing for the executive and judicial branches. Because I've made this point so many times. We're so dissatisfied with the way our executive branch operates. You know, every day, green swimming pools, potholes, this, wasting money, on and on and on. And I've made the point over and over again that the legislature has to lead the way in straightening out the government and draining the swamp. But the legislature is not able to do that until it takes the moral high ground. You can't tell everybody else to behave when you're not behaving yourself. So this could be step one. Legislature straightens out its own travel policies and then statutorily does the same thing for the executive branch. Otherwise, if the legislature tried to do it for the executive branch, you'd get the feedback, well, you're not doing it yourself, so you're a hypocrite over there, legislature. Okay, I was peeking out of the corner of my eye here, and I think I might have spotted a relevant Facebook comment. Let me see if I can find it. Gus Castro Jasangas, by the way, who comes to us from Texas, sometimes even Brownsville, Texas, who obviously knows a little bit about technology, he said, that is ridiculous. I use technology to conduct my meetings with key government officials and key executive officers of corporations to conduct my business that benefits Guam starting 2021. And let's see, I thought there was another good one here. Let's see. Oh, Jesse Limtiaco comes up with something that's really helpful here. American-style politics alive and well on the colony. You know, I can't tell you how poignant these comments are and how much they add to the discussion. Jesse, I'll tell you what, I will draw up a map to the Screw Guam building in D.C., and I'll let you borrow it the next time you go back there, and you can go back there and tell them about the colony.
Is it near the Smithsonian, sir?
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Let's see. I saw another pretty good comment here somewhere, but I can't find it now. Oh, well. Okay. So, good move, Real Joe Cruz. I'm sorry, Jim Moylan. And according to, Ken's got a comment. GMH spent $100,000 to send 2 people to a seminar in London they could have attended online. They could have used the other $98,000 to fix the elevators. Yeah, good point. But that's, Ken, American-style politics alive and well in the colony. Yeah, that kind of thinking. That's American-style politics alive and well in the colony. So I gotta keep remembering that so that I can recognize it when it happens. It would be a matter of decolonization if government of Guam officials could willy-nilly go back to the mainland, to D.C. on trips without any explanation to anybody. That would be decolonization. Okay, and then next on the card, this is an item that has been here for a while, but it keeps metamorphosizing. It started out as Bavakwa versus Chamorro culture. Then it went to Democrats versus babies. And now it's Bavakwa versus Festpac deniers. And this is Bavacqua's latest column in the Post, in the Daily News now. The Daily News identifies this person as Michael Lujan Bavacqua is an author, artist, activist, and assistant professor of Chamorro Studies at the University of Guam. Now, I have the GG1 that shows that Michael Bavacqua is a full-time employee of Senator Kelly Marsh Titano. So does he have two jobs? Is he full-time at the university and at Kelly Marsh Titano? I wonder. So we started out here with a column called National Issues Can Cause Ideological Conflicts. And Michael Bavacqua straightened us out there as to the Chamorro culture. And he says he's not in favor of a situation where the Catholic Church can dictate to people what the Chamorro culture is, feeling much more able to do that himself. So he's kind of set himself up as the arbiter of what is and what isn't Chamorro culture. And he zeroed in on abortion and told us that he doesn't go along with the idea that abortion is, that there was no cultural affinity for abortion, that abortion was not part of the Chamorro culture, the pre-Hispanic Chamorro culture, because he says that the matrilineal Chamorro culture nowadays would recognize a woman's right to choose. And I think I pretty thoroughly debunked the whole thing, including his misuse of the word matrilineal. But anyhow, we picked that up and spent a little time with that. And now, today's column, he says, GovGuam funding for FESPAC isn't a waste. And I did my own little informal survey, and I think 99% of the people on the island think spending $350,000 to send 100 people to Honolulu to do the dances that Frank Ravone invented in 1987 is a waste. However, since Michael Bavacqua is the arbiter of Chamorro culture, I think I have to assume a new mantle. In addition to the other things that I've been called, I now have to confess before you, my brothers and sisters, and the international radio listening audience of Tall Tales, I am a FESPAC denier. I've been a global warming denier, you know, ever since I used to freeze my tail off during Wisconsin winters. So I'm a global warming denier, and I'm also a FESPAC denier. And I just peeking out of the corner of my eye here, and Andre Bainham comes along and he says, yes, it is. It's a huge waste of taxpayers' money when the roads, hospitals, and schools are in disrepair. It's a huge waste of taxpayers' money when we don't have enough police officers in the neighborhoods and illicit drugs are rampant on the island. It's a huge waste of money that the hardworking tax-paying people of Guam pay to this government for the basic services that should benefit all citizens. So please spare us the BS. Go have fun on taxpayers' dime. And by the way, if you find some solutions to the issues mentioned above, be sure to let the taxpayers know. Yeah. So, Andre, my brother, we're both FESPAC deniers. So, I don't know. I suppose the only cure for that would be to get a red baseball cap that says on the front of it, "Make FESPAC great again." Maybe we could chip in and buy one of those for Michael Bavacqua. Yeah. So here's the late, and you notice that Kelly Marsh Titano just can't stop defending FESPAC. If it were so obvious, you wouldn't think that she would be so persistent and coming back. But anyhow, here's what Michael says today. On February 10, the 100-person delegation that will represent Guam at the 2020 Festival of Pacific Arts in Hawaii in June was announced. FestPac takes place every 4 years, and Guam was the most recent island nation to host it in 2016. I am fortunate to be attending this year as the chairperson for the Literary Arts Committee. Now, you are indeed fortunate. So let's see, you think FestPac is a good idea. You don't think that it's a waste of money to spend $350,000 to send 100 people back to Hawaii. And let's see, oh yeah, you're going too, aren't you, Michael? Yeah. Well, I guess I kind of understand your rationale there. And what is the Literary Arts Committee? Literary refers to writing. Poems, prose, etc. is the stuff that you put in the daily news on a weekly basis. Is that your literary art? Okay, so time for the 7th inning stretch, and we'll go straight from the 7th inning stretch to Honolulu and FestPac.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Cocoa Coffee Company mugs are now here. Show pride for your island as you enjoy your delicious Circle K coffee. Each generously sized 16-ounce mug is etched with Guam-inspired images like Chief Gadao, Serena, Two Lovers, and many more. The Cocoa Coffee Company mug collection is available for a limited time only, so don't miss out. Get yours today and collect them all. Exclusively available at Circle K locations. A portion of the proceeds go toward the Cocoa Bird Recovery Program.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mescla. Try their featured special for February. Shrimp hash crusted parrotfish, succulent parrotfish fillets, crusted with a shrimp farce, twice cooked, served over basil-laced sweet potato croquette, and a crab and corn bisque sauce. Visit Mescla in Agotya and now in Tumon at the Grand Plaza Hotel. For reservations, please call 969-2652.
Center field bleachers, Wrigley Field, Chicago, and we go from Chicago straight to Honolulu for FestPac, where if we wait for a little while until June, we could see these young kids from Guam dressed in their grass skirts. The girls will be wearing those coconut shell bras and doing Hawaiian dances and Samoan dances and dances from New Zealand, all in the name of perpetuating the Chamorro culture. Now, according to this article here, Master of Chamorro Dance, Eileen Mano, is going. So I guess the reason Eileen Mano is going to go is because Frank Rabone, the guy who invented all this stuff in 1987, can't make it. Judy Flores, who is the chair for demonstrations and exhibits, and Leah Botsinas, chair for special events. Now, I wonder what special events at FestPac are going to be. What do you think, Real Joe Cruz?
I have no idea, sir.
Yeah.
I'm not going.
You're not going.
No, I've decided not to.
Yeah. I wonder, I guess we're a little bit tardy here, right?
True.
We're a little bit tardy, but I should have written to the FestPac folks and asked them to include the folks from our big halftime show, the marching band, the drill team. Yeah.
That's worth it.
Yeah. As an example of Chamorro culture, right? Yeah. Okay. The press conference at the Guam Museum brought together dozens of the recently selected delegates. It was inspiring to see many who have been to FestPac before, and some youths who are eager to represent the island and take on their own role in perpetuating Chamorro culture. I wonder how one goes about doing that, doing the Frank Rabone dances. Now, and this whole culture thing is, of course, the all-purpose tool. It's kind of like Jesse and his what is it? The American way in the colony. It's the culture. The first person, if there's a disagreement, an argument, a discussion, the first person who says Chamorro culture wins the argument. But when people have asked me, well, do you know much about the Chamorro culture, Bob? I always say, yeah, I know something about the Chamorro culture. I've lived for over 50 years in the epicenter of Chamorro culture. Oh, really? Where's that, Rhoda? No, that's the island of Guam. Guam is the epicenter of Chamorro culture. So if you want to know how Chamorro culture is practiced, then come to Guam, keep your eyes and ears open, and you can see and observe what it is. Yeah, but what about the basket weaving? Well, that's stuff we used to do 100 years ago. It's part of the history of the Chamorro culture. But to say that we're going to preserve the Chamorro culture by teaching kids how to do basket weaving is like saying that we're going to go back to Wisconsin and teach kids how to shoot deer with bow and arrow. Preserve the culture. Anyhow, pretty hard to argue with a free trip back to Honolulu, especially when you know that the chairperson of the Literary Arts Committee is going to be none other than Michael Bavacqua, columnist at the Daily News. Now, Michael goes on here, and he says, although the gathering at the museum, although the gathering was beautiful and exciting, it was marred in minor ways by some primarily social media negativity. The FestPac deniers. Recent months have seen a good deal of misinformation about what FestPac is and isn't. Some have called it a junket or a vacation. I don't know if I don't think any. Let me try this. FestPac is a junket and a vacation. Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm part of that group. Some have promoted the idea that funding FestPac is taking resources away from pressing problems. Let me try that one on. FestPac is taking funding away from pressing problems. None of these things are true, and in my opinion, spreading this type of misinformation only makes fixing any problems on island much more difficult. Well, I'm going to stick with it. I've expressed my my position on those two items, and I maintain the truthfulness of those two positions. Oh, we got another Joe back, huh? Okay, another Joe. Climb on the Ferris wheel again.
Yeah, Uncle Bob, free is a good price. Perfect price.
Yeah.
So, Uncle Bob, I don't know if it's a theory or a hypothesis as to why it's so important for this millennials, younger generation, to perpetuate what they are so happy to believe. is Chamorro culture from those who are a little bit older to those who are possibly at the most approaching their mid-60s or early 70s. So I would compare it to start out with the horse whisperers, and then they became dog, like Caesar. What's his name? He's kind of like the dog whisperer. So what you got here is Pacific Islanders. They want to have something they can do when they greet each other. So kind of like a stateside breakdancing culture. Instead of attacking each other, we can break out in hula dancing, as opposed to throwing spears at each other. That's just the start of a theory or hypothesis. I don't know which is the better explanation there, Kababa. I'm just saying, it makes sense if you want to be able to socialize with other cultures. Kind of like Native Americans had their own special form of sign language or smoke signals, and they can communicate with each other over long distances, or not necessarily knowing each other's language or dialect, but using common sign language.
I think that's part of Elizabeth Warren's campaign.
Oh, the Pocahontas campaign?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, I'm just saying, look, Bob, I think it's born out of a strong need to be able to communicate with someone you come across who happens to be Pacific Islanders, and also to feel as though you're included in participating in what you could compare to hula breakdancing, and say, oh, cool, you can do that, we can do that. And I think they had that version of that in Papua New Guinea, where all those tribes that were formerly cannibals got together and they started sharing each other, competing with each other rather, in their dances. But whether or not it's called traditional, to them it's a new tradition that they would like to perpetuate, and not so much an old tradition.
Well,
but,
it's interesting that what Bavacqua and others are advocating is that we perpetuate something that never existed before.
Well, or they could be seeing it as something that they're newly creating,
yes,
so to speak.
Yeah.
But you can say the same about ballet and other contemporary forms of modern dance, right?
Yes.
So, or you can say the same about ballroom dancing or folk dancing. I'm just saying they want something to do. They found something to do. They found something they could create, and now they want to share it and call it part of a new Guam culture, so to speak. But it does bug me, as you say, when they call it traditional, and the idea of traditional meaning it goes back decades or centuries, which you and I both know is not the case, Uncle Bob.
Yes, sir.
But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. Thanks for your time, Uncle Bob.
Thank you very much, another Joe. Very good points. Yeah, the perpetuating of that which has only existed for 30 years, all in the name of preserving the Chamorro culture. So, if we really were serious about this, we ought to send some people back to Honolulu who could sing what we used to refer to as hillbilly songs. I was listening to the radio about 6 months ago, and a hillbilly song was used as break music, and this girl said, "Wow, that country and western song sounded just like some of our Chamorro music, but with English words." So, of course, the explanation is that at the end of World War II, the island was inundated with sailors and Marines, some of whom came from Appalachia, some of whom were hillbillies. They had their guitars, they sang their country and western music. Local folks liked it, picked it up, used it, learned the words, substituted Chamorro words, and that's as much a part of our culture as the dances that we borrowed from Honolulu 30-some years ago. But who am I to say what the Chamorro culture is and what the Chamorro culture isn't? I've got to get that red baseball cap that says, "Make Chamorro Great Again," right after I get one for Michael Bavacqua, who is the final arbiter of what is and what isn't Chamorro culture. So going back to this column, he says that none of these things are true, and in my opinion, spreading this type of information only makes fixing problems on island much more difficult. A minute fraction of the annual budget of the government of Guam goes to supporting programs for the arts and culture like FESPAC. A minute portion. This is kind of like using the word only in front of a dollar figure. You know, I keep coming back to my old song, Michael. This is what I want to see. I don't know if anybody else wants to see this or not, but as far as our government is concerned, I want to see an effective, efficient government operating within the rule of law that provides basic government services. Cultural preservation is not a job of the government. The government should stay out of it. Otherwise, you wind up with what we got now, government officials telling us what it is and what it isn't, and telling us that those of us who have other ideas are making fixing problems on the island much more difficult. All of us FESPAC deniers. And then he goes on to say, using FESPAC and cultural artists as punching bags doesn't ensure less waste or incompetence in the government. All it does is distract. I see. Using FESPAC and cultural artists. Now, Michael Bavacqua apparently is a cultural artist because he is the chairperson for the Literary Arts Committee. So we shouldn't use Michael Bavacqua as a punching bag. He goes on to say it has been disheartening to see how some of this criticism unfairly hits the delegates who are doing nothing more than trying to perpetuate, there you go, perpetuate and educate about their culture. Well, I know that our Carl is a connoisseur of cultural pursuits, so I'm going to take a short break here and go to our Carl. Good afternoon, our Carl.
Hey, Bob. Was enjoying your conversation, your dialogue, the call-ins while I was driving around. It's always very, very interesting as usual, and I learned a lot. Yeah, I think what we're seeing here really in the FESPAC is the latest bright, shiny object in a long string of bright, shiny objects that constantly distract our legislators when they get into office. It's always the same old pattern. You know, all these fantastic promises, we're going to do this, 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 this. They get into office, and then they just get distracted into all these things. And as a taxpayer, as a voter, I'm only going to look at three major things when I go to vote at the end of each of their terms, the governor's term and also the legislature's term. I'm going to look at the condition of the hospital and the medical system, the big three. Number one is the hospital and the public health care. I'm going to look at the condition of public education, the schools. I got one really close by, Beneventi. If anyone wants to see why I'm, kind of irritated, all they need to do is go by there. 4 of my kids went there. And also public safety, specifically the prison, which according to what we've been told, the prisoners there are living under inhumane conditions. And the rest of this, all these bright, shiny objects, it doesn't mean anything to me. And as far as the importance of culture and, how important Chamorros are, how exactly are Chamorros that have died because of the conditions at the hospital supposed to enjoy the culture? How is that going to... How are they supposed to appreciate the culture?
Well, perhaps, and this is pretty sardonic, but perhaps they had Chamorro-style funerals. Oh, no, wait a minute. A lot of them would have had Catholic funerals, and Michael Bavacqua has determined that to say that Catholicism is an important part of the Chamorro culture is not exactly, he doesn't like that very much. So I heard your big three, Carl, but you didn't mention perpetuating the culture. That's not one of the things you're going to look at in the next election?
Well, see, I think the way I think remembering where we came from is extremely important, and we got federal funds to build a nice museum. It's got great displays to remember our, where we came from, and that is very important. I think that's very educational. It's very good. But I sense there's actually a desire to go back in time. And my response is, if we really are that committed, I think the ideal outcome would have been, for some, if we'd have never had a single Spaniard, a single Japanese, a single American, a single German, a single Mexican, a single Filipino ever touch Guam. Just extract all that out of our history. And the important question to ask is, would we, first of all, 100% of everyone listening, including me, who has Chamorro blood, would not exist. But would we want to live on that Guam? And I can pretty much guarantee 99.999% of the people listening wouldn't want to live on that. They might want to visit it, but wouldn't want to live there.
Good point, Carl. Very good point. Thanks a lot for calling. I got to take a break, and we're heading down the home stretch, but I'm glad you called. Good points.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Toyota, please listen to this. It could help you avoid injury, maybe save your life. The Takata airbags installed in certain Toyotas can explode and shoot out sharp metal fragments at people inside the vehicle. You don't need to be in a collision. They could explode any time. In the U.S., these airbags have caused 26 deaths. There's been a worldwide recall of Takata airbags, and most have had the faulty parts replaced. But here in Guam, there are still over 3,000 Toyotas on the road with potentially lethal airbags, and yours could be one of them. So please, take your Toyota to Atkins Crow, even if you didn't buy it from us, and get the inflator replaced. It costs you nothing, it takes just about an hour, and it could save a life, yours or someone you love. The AK song says we're here for life. That's never been more true.
At Atkins Crow, we're here.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So here we are, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky, the home stretch means I got about 7 more minutes to finish up the program. I noticed that our Carl has come back to ride on the merry-go-round one more time. I got a couple of things that I got to do here, our Carl, and then I'll pick you up. Ishmael Velez has an interesting comment. It's not the government's job to protect and impart culture onto its people. It is a father's responsibility to decide if he wants to impart a culture onto the kids. I have no problem with the government protecting history, but as for culture, they can mind their own businesses, all right? And then part of my international radio listening audience today, Aaron Johnstone, calling from Melbourne, Australia. That's certainly part of our international radio listening audience, Melbourne, Australia. Did I ever tell my Australia joke on the radio, Real Joe Cruz?
I vaguely remember one. You could have. I'm not sure.
It's a really good joke. Can I tell it again?
Of course.
Yeah, it's World
By
War.
all means.
World War II. Okay, in the Pacific, a ship sinks, and an Australian survives the sinking of the ship and washes ashore on a small coral atoll, small island, actually. And he's there for one day, and then the next day, he looks out at sea, and he sees this U.S. Marine wading through the surf. And the Marine's got a M1 slung over his shoulder. He's got a bandolier of ammunition over the other shoulder. He's got a bayonet on his belt. He's got a string of hand grenades on one of his shoulders. And he's got a K-bar in his mouth. And he comes wading ashore. And as he comes wading ashore, the Aussie pokes his head up over some of the bushes. And the Marine sees him, and he says to the Aussie, "I came here to die." And the Aussie says, "Yeah, really, mate? I came here yesterday." I might have told it before, but it's a good joke.
It is.
Yeah, so, and Michael King is here from Germany. Ach du lieber, Michael King, Michael Koenig.
That reminds me of a German ship was in the coast, and another ship was sinking, and they were calling out on the radio, we're sinking," and the German ship responded to them, "What is your ship sinking about?"
All right, Real Joe Cruz. And then Aaron Johnstone, our caller from our Facebooker from Australia, she'll be right, mate. Okay, so let's find out what the other Carl wants to add to the mix here. Good afternoon again, our Carl.
Hey, good afternoon, Bob. Yeah, I just want to make one quick final point, and that I believe the fixation with this identity is the same reason why we see it so strongly being pushed in the mainland, especially on the mainland campuses. If you can get people to identify with a group, identification is an extremely powerful way to influence people's emotions and behavior, especially if you push the idea of oppression. And so the basic idea is to create as many of these identity groups as possible, especially what's popular nowadays is among Black Americans, the gays, women, trans, and to unite them around a central idea. They call that intersectionality. And unite them where their interests coincide, which, you know, for the left is this social justice utopia that drives it forward. So, to me, that is what is the central motive with this fixation on identity. It's a tremendously powerful tool.
And the intersectionality here, Carl, is this enforced observance of the, quote, Chamorro culture and its preservation is the stalking horse for separatism.
Yeah, and there's also here, there's what is at this stage is being created is this utopian vision. Everything related to the United States is, in critical theory, is being broken down and framed as evil, and everything that is separate from the United States is utopia. You know, it's just perfection, and it's wonderful. And the wonderful thing about utopian visions is everything works perfectly. You know, in reality, what we have to deal with in the day-to-day world, there's problems and there's things we need to work through and there's stuff you've got to hash out. But in the utopian vision, everything works beautifully. It's a powerful, powerful thing. Anyway, Bob, thank you for allowing me to chime in. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it's always good to have you on to help me down the home stretch there, Carl. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Always would like to do my part. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so here we are at the end of another exciting, educational, enlightening, elucidating episode of Tall Tales. We'll be back tomorrow at 1600. See you then.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3. HD3.
Democrats take on the new guy. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. In their debate in Las Vegas last night, Pete Buttigieg going after the two perceived frontrunners.
We could wake up 2 weeks from today, the day after Super Tuesday,